Harry met someone with whom he is in love.
Meghan Markle is furious, and the reason goes far deeper than jealousy. Lady Colin Campbell has just made a claim that is detonating across the internet. A secret girlfriend, texts on Harry's phone, a marriage that may not be what the public has been sold.
Meghan found out about it after she discovered texts on Harry's phone.
What actually happened here isn't just about who this woman allegedly is. It's about what her existence, if confirmed, would collapse entirely. The stakes are bigger than anyone covering this is admitting. So here is where this story actually starts, with a specific moment on a podcast that, sources say, detonated something the British royal commentary world had been quietly waiting for. Lady Colin Campbell, Lady C, appeared on the Dan Wootton Uncensored podcast and made a claim that spread across the internet within hours. Her words, as close to verbatim as the recordings allow: Harry has met someone, the woman is his age, he is in love with her, and Meghan found out about it after she discovered texts on his phone. Lady C attributed all of this to, and I'm quoting her directly here, my sources of information. Now, that would be explosive enough on its own, but here is what most people who shared it and reshared it completely missed. Lady C herself, in the same breath, inserted a caveat. Her exact words: if Harry does have an interest elsewhere, and you notice I say if, and I do so for legal reasons. She then added, again for legal reasons, that she hadn't actually said he was having an affair. That single caveat is doing an enormous amount of work, because what she has constructed is a claim that is structurally impossible to disprove, and yet it spread virally because the architecture of the claim, the texts on the phone, the secret woman, the furious wife, maps onto anxieties about this marriage that millions of people already carried. Lady C didn't create those anxieties, she simply handed them a shape. But here is the question that nobody asking about Meghan's fury has actually answered. Who, precisely, is this woman? Because so far, she has no name, no face, and no confirmed location. That is exactly where we go next. The moment you actually try to locate this woman, she dissolves. What you are left with is a cluster of claims that originated not from any investigative reporting, but from a single podcast appearance, laundered through dozens of outlets until repetition started to feel like verification. Here is what is actually being claimed: that she exists somewhere in the orbit of Montecito, that unnamed people have reportedly seen them together, and that 2 photographs have been circulating online, speculated to show Harry in proximity to an unidentified woman. I looked at those photographs. Neither confirms anything, neither carries a verified date, location, or name. They are the visual equivalent of Lady C's legal caveat, suggestive enough to fuel a narrative, specific enough to feel real, but containing nothing that could survive actual scrutiny. Sources suggest the entire architecture of this mystery woman rests on one thing: the absence of a denial that feels completely convincing. And that absence, deliberately or not, is doing most of the heavy lifting. Because here is what nobody is asking loudly enough. If nobody can name her, photograph her, or place her at a confirmed time and location, does she exist at all in the way being claimed? Which brings us to the marriage itself. Because the rumor needed somewhere to land, and the public record had quietly been building that landing strip for months. And here's what the rumor actually needed to survive. It needed a pattern, and the public record had been quietly assembling one for the better part of 2 years. Sources suggest the strained narrative didn't originate with Lady C at all. It had been building in plain sight, in flight logs, in brand registrations, in social media architecture, the kind of circumstantial accumulation that, individually, means nothing, but collectively starts to feel like a map. Start with the professional separation. By early 2025, Harry and Meghan were operating deliberately parallel tracks. Meghan's American Riviera Orchard brand, registered separately. Her Instagram account, relaunched solo before Harry's presence was even acknowledged on it. Her podcast, her Netflix projects, all constructed around a single name, not Sussex, Meghan. Now, that alone proves nothing. Sources suggest building separate professional identities inside a celebrity marriage is genuinely common. But what made observers pay attention was the geography layered on top of it. Meghan's solo appearances: Paris in late 2024, Geneva, Chicago, placed her on different continents from Harry with a regularity that tabloids quietly cataloged. Meanwhile, Harry's solo flights back to London, several logged across 2024 and into 2025, had no Meghan attached to them. Separate schedules, audiences, and optics. Was this a couple consciously splitting their brand footprint, or something else? That question started circulating inside royal press circles months before Lady C said a single word publicly, and that pre-existing question is precisely why her claim landed with such force. The rumor didn't have to build the landing strip. The timeline had already built it, but here is what that timeline actually proves, and what it completely fails to prove, because Meghan wasn't staying silent about any of this. She was pushing back, directly, on record, and in front of cameras. Start with Vancouver. At the 2025 Invictus Games, in front of a full crowd, Meghan walked out on stage, introduced Harry, and greeted him with what multiple outlets described as a passionate kiss, a real, visible, public moment of warmth between a husband and wife who, according to the rumor ecosystem, were supposedly living as strangers. That moment was noted inside press circles immediately, not because it proved everything was fine, but because it completely disrupted the timeline Lady C's narrative depended on. And then there was the Jamie Kern-Lima show appearance in April 2025. On record, directly asked about divorce speculation, Meghan's answer was unambiguous. She shot it down, described their relationship positively, and according to coverage at the time, left no reasonable interpretive wiggle room. Now, here is what I think matters about both of those moments. They are real, they happened, but here is what they don't actually settle. A kiss at a public event and an on-record denial during a promotional appearance are also exactly the moves a strategically intelligent person makes when they know a narrative is forming against them. Nothing individually proves the story false, but nothing individually proves it true either. Sources suggest that is precisely the trap Meghan cannot escape right now. Every denial reads as either genuine or managed. Every public display of affection reads as either real or performance. The evidence cuts both ways, and Lady C's claim, structurally, was designed to survive exactly this kind of counter-evidence. So who in Harry's past actually set the emotional standard that made this kind of rumor feel plausible to begin with? Now, to understand why Lady C's claim landed the way it did, you have to understand Chelsea Davy. Chelsea is not just Harry's longest relationship before Meghan. Sources suggest she became the emotional benchmark against which every woman in his life has since been measured, including, quietly, by Harry himself. They were together, on and off, for roughly 7 years, from around 2004 to 2011. A Zimbabwe-born heiress who grew up barefoot on a game reserve, genuinely unbothered by protocol, cameras, or palace expectation. She didn't want the spotlight. Sources say that was specifically what Harry loved about her, and that contrast matters enormously right now, because what Lady C's claim is actually trafficking in beneath the texts. The mystery woman, the Fury, is a very specific idea that Harry's deepest instinct is towards someone uncomplicated, someone who exists outside the performance of royal relevance, someone who doesn't need the brand. Chelsea Davy was exactly that woman, and sources suggest the reason Harry's rumored companion is described in such deliberately vague terms, Montecito, adjacent, private, low profile, is because that description maps almost perfectly onto what Harry chose before. Nothing about Harry's relationship history suggests he gravitates toward ambition. Everything about it suggests the opposite, which is precisely why Meghan's position becomes so complicated the moment this comparison surfaces publicly. But here is what actually destroyed the Chelsea relationship, and it wasn't incompatibility. Sources say it was something far more deliberate and far darker. Harry himself testified to it under oath. In his 2023 lawsuit against Mirror Group newspapers, Harry testified that tabloid journalists had accessed Chelsea Davy's phone. Sources say he described in precise detail how reporters intercepted voicemails, monitored movements, and essentially mapped the private geography of a relationship that was supposed to be untouchable. He named phone hacking as a direct cause of the erosion between them. Now think about what that actually means. Harry spent years watching a relationship he valued genuinely, quietly dissolve, not because of anything either person did, but because external actors had installed themselves inside their private communication. Every text, voicemail, and every moment of vulnerability between two people who thought they were speaking only to each other. That experience didn't just make Harry paranoid about the press. It made him paranoid about phones specifically, about what gets stored, about who else might be reading, which is why the detail Lady C introduced, Meghan discovering texts on Harry's phone, is not random. It is, deliberately or not, the exact mechanism Harry has publicly testified destroyed his most significant previous relationship. Someone found something on a phone. Someone read what wasn't meant for them. He knows this story intimately. He lived the original version of it, and that is what makes the current narrative so difficult to simply dismiss. Not because it's proven, it isn't, but because it maps onto a documented psychological architecture Harry himself built in public, in sworn testimony, on the record. The question is, who gets to use that architecture, and who built the claim in the first place? Because the person making this allegation has a very particular track record of her own, and understanding it changes everything about how much weight any of this actually deserves. So who actually is Lady Colin Campbell? And why does any of this matter? Because the entire weight of this story rests on one source, her, and understanding what she actually is changes how seriously any of it deserves to be taken. Lady C has published 7 unauthorized books about the British royal family. 7. That's not a casual observer making an offhand claim. That is a woman who has built an entire professional identity around royal revelation, who understands precisely how to package palace intrigue for maximum impact. Her method is specific. She operates in a particular space, mixing verifiable, documented palace facts with unverifiable source claims that are structurally impossible to disprove. She says enough that is checkable to establish credibility, then uses that credibility to make the uncheckable claims land harder. That's not nothing. That's a sophisticated technique. She also added her own legal caveat explicitly on the Dan Whitten podcast, using the word "if" and stating she did so for legal reasons. She built the escape hatch into the claim herself. That's either intellectual honesty or the precise language of someone who knows exactly where the line is and has carefully stayed one step behind it. But here's what actually matters. Lady C's credibility as an asset only works because she already exists inside a larger ecosystem of voices saying similar things about Meghan, and that ecosystem is considerably louder than most people realize. Now here is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable for Meghan's team, because Lady C didn't build her credibility in a vacuum. Start with Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister. On record, repeatedly, she has described Meghan as a calculated social climber who severed family ties once they became professionally inconvenient. Those interviews number in the dozens across multiple years. Then add the former Suits colleagues who quietly stopped appearing in supportive profiles around 2020. The unnamed palace aides who, according to multiple reports, described working environments characterized by early morning emails, tearful staff departures, and impossible to satisfy expectations. Several left with settlement agreements, meaning the full account is deliberately, legally sealed. Then layer in the commentators, Piers Morgan obviously, but also royal biographers, former BBC correspondents, and American entertainment journalists who had covered Meghan since her Suits years, all arriving, separately, at overlapping characterizations. Nothing individually damning, everything collectively forming a portrait. And that portrait is precisely the backdrop against which Lady C's claim about discovered texts lands with such force. It doesn't need to be proven, it only needs to feel consistent. But here's the question: if Meghan is genuinely furious, where is the evidence of that fury? Because when you strip it back, Meghan is furious traces to exactly one source, Lady C, one podcast appearance, one characterization delivered without a timestamp, without a witness, and protected, as she herself acknowledged, by a legal caveat she inserted in real time. That is the entire evidentiary foundation. Now compare that to what is actually observable. In Vancouver, in front of thousands of people, Meghan stepped onto that Invictus stage composed, warm, and visibly affectionate. On the Jamie Kern-Lima show, she addressed the divorce speculation directly, calmly, and without a single crack in her delivery. And as recently as mid-March 2026, she was posting family content on Instagram. Sources suggest that someone genuinely absorbing the kind of fury Lady C describes would struggle to maintain that consistency across 3 separate, unscripted public moments. But here is where it gets interesting. Meghan has spent years understanding exactly how media narratives operate. The composed exterior is not necessarily evidence of no fury. It could be precisely the opposite, a deliberately constructed counter-image designed to make the claim look ridiculous by contrast. And that is actually the problem with Meghan is furious as a statement. It cannot be disproven by calm behavior, because calm behavior becomes strategic. It cannot be confirmed by the absence of a public meltdown, because powerful people rarely provide one. Lady C made the claim unfalsifiable, and then handed it to millions of people who already believe the portrait built by years of accumulated commentary. So what does that mean for the claim itself? And more importantly, for the one detail Lady C still hasn't answered? So here is where we land. Harry and Meghan have pursued separate public identities. There are documented solo trips, separate professional projects, and a visible recalibration of their shared brand. That part is real. What is plausible? That a marriage operating under that much financial pressure, public scrutiny, and strategic calculation has private tensions. Sources suggest most marriages under far less pressure do. What is pure invention? The woman, the texts, the love affair, every specific narrative detail. Lady C introduced is unverifiable by design. She said so herself, legally, on camera, and yet it spread to millions because it latched onto something people already half believed. Now, here is the loose thread. The one detail Lady C has legally refused to clarify is the woman in Montecito itself. Sources say Lady C gestured at proximity. People have seen them together, the implication of access, of closeness that would make discovery plausible, but she never placed the woman at a specific address, a specific radius, and that omission is not accidental. Because if you name a location precisely, you name a neighborhood. If you name a neighborhood, you narrow a pool. If you narrow a pool, someone finds a name, and a name means a lawsuit. So the geography stays deliberately, legally blurred, close enough to feel real, vague enough to be untouchable. That is the structure of the whole story actually. Close enough to feel real, vague enough to be untouchable, built on a foundation that cannot be confirmed, but more importantly, and this is what Lady C understood completely, cannot be fully dismissed either. Meghan cannot sue over a claim. Lady C herself caveated with, if Harry cannot deny a woman who has no name, the palace cannot issue a correction about a location that was never given. The story just sits there, floating, unresolved, and sources suggest that is exactly where Lady C intended to leave it. The power has shifted, and Harry's name is now leverage. Lady C won the news cycle. Meghan lost the narrative, but the unnamed woman remains unnamed. Sources say that's not accidental. Who benefits most from keeping her anonymous? Call it what it is, a controlled detonation.